Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin McKenzie. I'm the Artistic Director of American Ballet Theatre, and I'm thrilled to have Jessica Lang and Herman Cornejo with me to have a little discussion about a very special week that is different than we expected it to be this week. Today, we would have opened our Metropolitan Opera House season with two programs under the heading of Then and Now. And the purpose of that programming was really to give a little reflection on the notion that as we turn 80 years old, what would have been a typical program of works that ABT either commissioned or was defined and sort of owned by ABT in the first 40 years of his existence. And that program would have been Theme and Variations of George Balanchine, which was created on us in the 1940s. I think it was 47, but I'm not entirely sure. Anthony Tudor's Jardin aux Lilas, which was created in the very early 40s, I think possibly the late 30s, on Ballet Rambert, but came to ABT's rep when Tudor came to ABT in 1940, and ran like a movie for decades. And then the final work of the program, which is Fancy Free, by the celebrated Jerome Robbins, who literally went on. This was the template for the musical On the Town, and was really the template for an entire series of works that those three creators, Jerome Robbins, Oliver Smith, and Leonard Bernstein, went on to basically create the American musical, the basis of it. I mean, they had a heyday of, it's overstating it to say create the American musical, but they redefined it. They owned it and defined what American artists were about, using a classical basis of everything in every part of their discipline. So that is, let's stay on that program for a moment and talk with Herman. Herman, you have had your experience certainly with Theme and Variations and with Fancy Free throughout your career.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about what that experience is like. I share some of that with you. I danced both those roles. I actually danced all three of them, but I shared both those roles. But I'd be interested to hear what your impression and feelings about dancing them were.
Well, for me, it's an honor to start with, to be with American Ballet Theatre for this long, and to have shared with you so many roles that you coach me. And Theme and Variation became one of my favorite because it's so technical, and I think it's technique at its purest. Although I have to say it's one of the most nerve-wracking ballets I ever done. I think that beginning with that, that rumbling drums, curtain goes up, is the most nerve-wracking moments I have experienced on stage. But definitely one of the most rewarding at the end, holding that ballerina on your shoulder.
There's nothing quite like it. I laugh when you talk about that drum roll at the beginning, because somehow my feeling of it was I loved the work. It was so musical, and it was very rewarding to dance. But it was like doing a full-length ballet in 20 minutes, And I used to say, if I can just get through that drum roll before the curtain goes up, it's only 17 minutes out of my life. I can do this.
Never thought of that way. Wow.
Yeah. And one of the things that stand out after all the whatever memories and experience of doing it is almost every time at the end of the pas de deux and you run off the stage before the coda, sort of going upstage with what is 32 counts before you re-enter. It was like, what am I going to do with these? I can't move my feet. Did you have some, you know, everybody reacts differently. I mean, what was your feeling when you leave the stage after the pas de deux?
No, it's definitely, I mean, I wouldn't say just my feet were cramping, it's my whole body was cramping. And for some reason, I have this memory of performing theme aberration at the Bolshoi. And,
Wow.
you know,
Good luck.
it was a challenge. It made it 3 times harder. But I think just the music, I think the music made me go back to the stage.
Yeah.
And to the music, I go through the whole ballet.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Talk about Fancy Free.
And then we have Fancy, which to me is totally on the opposite side. It's so rewarding in the acting field. I really feel like I'm in a movie, you know, filming this movie. And maybe I'm lucky that I got to learn this ballet through Jean-Pierre, through Victor Barbie, through you, Kevin, and I rehearsed it a lot also with Damien Watzel. And I consider all 4 of you, like really actors. And so that was a great team to work on this character. For me, the acting, I wouldn't say is the most important for me in dance, but certainly it's what it takes a different level in what I do. So for me, working on Fancy Free, it was an eye-opener of what ballet really is. You're telling a story, and I just love Fancy. I love doing the first sailor, and I don't love doing the splits.
Especially after a double tour.
From a double tour, there was a challenge when I was first taught the ballet, but that I think it's just a masterpiece.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm trying to remember who coined this phrase between Balanchine and Robbins, that Balanchine is incredibly easy to learn and very difficult to perform, and Robbins is incredibly easy to perform but difficult to learn. But I must say, it was one of my very favorite things. It was so very human. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed that work.
And it also had a challenge for me to learn. It has a lot of tap, tap dancing, and I never tapped before, so that was a challenge for me at the beginning.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about, making this American music and move. I felt like I was really in America performing Fancy Free.
Really wonderful. I'm going to share just one quick little remembrance about Jardin aux Lilas, which we fondly call Lilac Garden because we're American. I remember it's for me, the thing that's special about the work, and it's influenced so many choreographers, is it has a very cinematic quality. It literally, you have this sense of fade in and fade out to the next scene. As with much of Tudor's work, it's about the human element. It's about the repression of your emotions. It's the story of a young woman having her a garden party to celebrate the wedding, and everything you need to know is in the titles of the characters. There are no program notes. The characters are called Caroline, the man she must marry, her lover, and a woman from his past. So it's very self-explanatory, and the only 2 people who were not invited to this party crash it, because one wants to have one last hurrah and one wants to try to influence the outcome of the party, and nobody wins. And it's just a portrait of a moment in time of what could have been. And the rehearsal process with Anthony Tudor was a very special thing. He was one of those old school people who would challenge the performer to see how much they're kind of willing to stand up for themselves, basically. I think what he was trying to do was to figure out if they had an opinion about what they were doing, and if so, justify it. And I was very new at ballet theater when I had my first rehearsal of it. And I was like, I had never worked with him. I had learned the work from a ballet master, and the man was about to come for the first run through. And I was all nervous and excited. And it was, you know, I loved the work. So I thought, well, all I have to do is do it and really experience loving the work, and it should be fine. And hopefully he won't, you know, call me out. So the very first moments of the ballet, the lover comes on stage for 1 second. He literally comes on, sees that she's with the man she must marry, and says, oh, no, and runs away and hides. And he he claps his hand, stops rehearsal, and he said, hey, you over there, the one with the black hair. I had black hair at that time. You made noise on the floor. Do you know why? And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't in control of my weight. And he said, no, you fool. You weren't engaging your imagination. There's leaves and moss, and you're hiding behind it. And he set this scene of what's in the wings and how furtive your entrances and exits are. And I went, okay. He said, let's start this. Are you ready? And I said, yes, I'm ready. And we started the ballet and ran the entire thing through. Didn't stop once. The ballet finished. He gave every single person notes except for me. And at 1 minute to the hour, he turned to me and he said, you with the black hair, you didn't make noise. And now you know why. And I said, yes, well, I was engaged. I had fleshed out, you know, my environment. He said, no, you fool, you are in control of your weight. And I burst out laughing. And that made all the difference. I think it was the reaction that he was trying to play me. And I recognized it, that allowed us to work together for 10 years so productively, because I watched him intimidate other people with that technique. And he would just keep pushing them until they cracked. And in later years, I asked other people who had worked with him, and they gave me this following advice. You know, he needed to push people so their defenses were so down that they revealed who they really were. And that's all he was looking for, is who are you really? Not who you want to be or who you think the character is, and then who are you? That's what we're interested in as artists. And it was a huge moment for me. It influenced my entire time at ABT, that one moment. So it was, you know, to wrap this program up, I'm just amazed that those three giants worked. You know, Balanchine created this work before he had his own company on ABT. Robbins, this was his very first choreographic effort. And Tudor stayed with ABT his entire life and literally was the artistic conscience that framed and shaped the company that we, in our last recent 40 years, which is the 40 years that I've presided over. I haven't presided over, but I joined the company in 1979. So I witnessed it, let's say it that way, firsthand since then. And since then, we've gone on to create so many ballets. And I felt it important that the next series from then to now reflect the artists who are working today. And in all honesty, one could not create a program that didn't reflect the work of Ratmansky, and for all that matters, Twyla Tharp, because they had created so many ballets for ABT within the last 40 years, and Ratmansky for a very condensed period. But I thought that it was very important to highlight Jessica, because somehow there was an organic link. through time. Jessica has been working and creating for ABT for 20 years, but somewhat under the radar, in all honesty. She's created works for our studio company. She's made incredible programs as a teacher and a mentor for students in our JKO and our outreach. The capacity to share knowledge and get, how do I put this? To help an artist discover what the word creativity actually means is a special gift of Jessica's. So I wanted to now turn the focus on you, Jessica, and talk about some of your work. But before we get there, you actually worked in Twyla Tharp's company. One of the works on this program is a work that Twyla created for Herman in celebration of his 20th anniversary. You know, you worked with her at a time that was very different than the time that Herman has worked with her. And I think it would be interesting for you to share stories of the tenor, the tone, the process of working with Twyla.
Well, it has been a wonderful journey, and something that, you know, you just don't know where you're going as you're going. So over time, you know, I graduated from Juilliard with a job dancing for Twyla Tharp's company, her company called Tharp. And, you know, it was a dream come true. It was, you know, all of my teachers at Juilliard were still performing with Martha Graham and different major companies. And I thought that's what I was supposed to be. I thought I was going to be a performer for my whole life, or as long as my body would last. And, you know, I had a private audition with Twyla and Shelley Washington, both of whom have a major relationship with American Ballet Theater. It was the hardest 20 minutes of my life. I can honestly say that. Getting the job, touring with the company, it was really incredible. The first 6 months, I was just like a kid, absorbing everything, reacting to every city, every audience, diving into Twyla's work with all of my effort. I always say I was never smarter than when I worked with her, because her demand in the studio was so intense, and it had to be done yesterday. It was just take this material, turn it around, flip it inside out. You know it, yes? You know, and it was, you had to just be really alert and awake. And what happened to me was that it had nothing really to do with her or the company. I just realized I was not a performer. I didn't want to be on stage. There was something that switched inside of me that was like, my experience of being creative at Juilliard started to win and try and start to drive like an inner visceral feeling that I thought, maybe this isn't right for me. And I was not brave enough, nor I would never have walked into her and said, thank you, but I don't really think this job is for me. Who was I to say something like that? And so I suffered. I suffered for the next like 18 months of just trying to do my job, trying to realize and recognize that maybe there was something that was, I didn't know how to do both, and I didn't know what I was feeling in terms of doing both, being a performer, and I didn't know yet if I was a dance maker, but I just knew that being a performer was not for me. And fortunately or unfortunately, things happen, and she sat us down in a very human way and just went around the company and asked us if we wanted to continue. And that was how our transition into not having that group anymore happened. And it kind of released me into this, oh, thank God, now I can, you know, move into a spectrum of like, what's next? What do I want to do? And it turned out, you know, making dances was something I wanted to explore. And my connection was that I sent my one work that I had made at Juilliard to John Meehan, who was artistic director of ABT2 at the time, studio company. And he said, whenever you're finished with Twyla, let me know. And the transition was so organic, and that was 20 years ago. And I made my 5th ballet ever on the organization.
And now, before we get on to talking about the developed work that you did in later years, I want to refer something you just said and ask Herman about it. You talked about the hardest 20 minutes of your life to do that audition. Was that based on the nerves or the process in which she used?
I think both. I mean, I was really prepared. I was a senior. I was very strong. Technically, I was very strong. Mentally, my director of Juilliard, Benjamin Hart-Garvey, had kind of prepped me and said, if she asks you to stand on your pinky, it's a test, do it. Like, try anything. She wants to see how far she can push you. So I knew going in, I think some of it was nerves and some of it was just the speed in which she expected, something from you. She was testing me the whole time, and I knew it was a test, but you just don't know how you're going to deliver in those moments. And, I just could barely feel my legs at the end of the 20 minutes. And I, powered through, and she sees a lot, as do I now, in what is the potential of the dancer. From the minute they walk in and put their bag down, you can recognize things in people. And I think she saw that in me.
I think that's so fascinating, because that is true of going from that journey of a performer to the front of the room. Many people either become ballet masters or choreographers or teachers or whatnot, but it is about that perception of how to get the best out of people. Herman, talk to me about when did you first work with Twyla?
My first work with Twyla was for Brahms Variations, which was created in the 2000. And I was only 19 years old. I was still in the corps, and Twyla chose me to do this piece as a principal dancer. There are 4 principal couples in this ballet, and I was one of them. And to my surprise, I was the one opening the ballet, to center stage, curtain up, and there was me with Ashley Tuttle. So my beginning with the company, it has to do a lot with Twyla. And that's why celebrating 20 years with ABT, with the new choreography by Twyla, was just, golden.
A nice full circle.
Nice full circle.
Yeah.
But listening to Jessica, it's incredible that 20 years later, Twyla is the same Twyla. It's non-stop, and you really have to be ready for her. And as Jessica said, she's looking at you when you come in and you put your back down. And I remember, I think one of the best corrections I had from Twyla was actually correction that she gave me of what I do when I'm off stage. And she was looking at me when I was just resting for my next entrance. And that's Twyla. She has 20 eyes looking at everybody at the same time, even if you're just not doing your part because you're resting. And she's looking how you're resting, what you do before your entrance. I think it's a remarkable work overall, not only the steps, but how create the energy, the atmosphere in the studio. And she's really intense, but I love that. And since she chose me for ballet, I have this respect for her.
Jessica, so now talk to me a little bit about your journey as a mentor, working with, you've had an experience with the dancers of ABT not unlike mine. Your first group that you worked on 21 years ago. Many of them are principals now. Some of them have retired.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Still going.
And it's talk about that dynamic in the studio when, similar to what you noticed about Twyla and Herman has noticed about Twyla, what I noticed about Tudor. The difference between what Robbins and Balanchine did for the company, they didn't make their career at ABT. They made unbelievable works for us, but didn't go through the arc of time with us. Talk about that dynamic of working with a group of people through different phases of their life, when they're students, when they're young professionals, when they're established principals. Well, how do you have those 20 eyes? Or is it just an organic, something you develop and trust your instincts?
I think it's interesting because you don't know. 20 years ago, again, I didn't know that I was standing. I mean, you see talent. You recognize Misty Copeland. You recognize David Hallberg. You recognize that there are these extraordinary artists and young potential in front of you. But you don't know what you're going to become. You don't know what they're going to become. You don't know. So many things can happen in life. Especially a dancer's life, you can get injured, you can retire, you can have a change of heart. Like there's just so much that can evolve. So it's like really, it's a blessing to arrive here at this moment and just kind of take a pause and say, wow, as young as they were with that potential, so was I. I mean, I was 24 and trying to form my ideas of what my work was and what I wanted to say, all the while trying to grow young dancers into these, to help like assist their artistic journey and what they needed to learn about how to work together, how to hone their own ideas and collaborate, because all choreographers want an artist who is open to bringing something to the table and not, waiting to be told every movement. You just can't. And I think that's what's so special about, having worked with Misty and David and Isabella and Corey and Devin and Hiseo and all these dancers, Skylar. And I mean, I can name almost everyone. I missed Herman by a year. I think he went from studio company into the main company the year before I got there. So I don't have that, connection, but I look at him and think, my God, they were right behind him. And so I see this star power that everyone carried. And now when we get into the studio in the main company, it's like, well, we arrived, we did the work, we put the time in, and now I know you. I really do know you. I know them more than they know I know them, because they were so young when they were, arriving at ABT, and it was the big city, and, that kind of fight for attention to get into the main company, and then that fight to push through the main company to the top. I watched it, I observed it, and, I appreciate it. And I think the same, that's also flipped back on me from these dancers, that they know that I know them. I know them from JKO. It's just been a remarkable journey.
Yeah. So now, you spin the clock forward a few years, quite a few years, and, you've done 2 works, well, actually 3 works on the main company. And your first one was, talk to me about the first, because I want to lead up to how we came to Garden Blue.
Right.
How did that get birthed?
Yeah. So the first, official commission was her notes in 2016 to the music of Fanny Mendelssohn. And I have always gotten this focus on being a female choreographer. This question has existed since the dawn of time, and I can understand now more than ever, what Twyla has done for for dance, for choreography, and like the like kind of push and edge she has. It's like, I get it. She wants to be known as a choreographer. Don't dare talk about her gender. It has nothing to do with the art she produces. And so at this time in 2016, I was getting bombarded with, like, it's almost like the whole world just woke up to this problem or issue. And it's like, well, it's everywhere. And but it's also nowhere. Like, please just only commission me if you like my work. Because I think talent is the most important thing that gets showcased. And so I made a series of works with the pronoun her in them, thinking this is the only thing I ever want to do about this and move on. And so I focused on like Georgia O'Keeffe, and for one piece, and for ABT, I did Fanny Mendelssohn, that she had composed, the sister to Felix Mendelssohn. She was a proficient composer herself, but because of the time in which she lived and the status of working would lower her class in society, that she was just meant to do it in her home. And at the same time, we were in a presidential election that was, leading up to what would be the first, possible female president. And so we know how that turned out. And I just wanted to focus on the beauty, the form, try to, work within the ballet technique as I saw it through my eyes today. And then the second work was actually, I'm lost. Garden Blue. It was Garden Blue.
Yeah.
And that work was, it was just beautiful. It was such again, an organic process. A lot of people know that I get my inspiration from probably anywhere else but dance. I don't go see dance and say, oh, I can make that. I want to try my hand at that exact theme or idea or style. That my inspiration comes from the world around me, whether it's visual art or music or historical ideas or themes. So I think it was such an organic process that when Sarah Crowner became a conversation point within the leadership of ABT, that, working potentially with her as a collaborator, that my name would arrive at that, she would take her art and do something with it. So it was just a really, I loved the process because it was really organic. Sarah is a beautiful person and a wonderful artist. And as soon as I saw her work, again, you just know when something is inspiring, and it didn't take much to say, yes, of course I want to work with her and her work and see what we can do and make it into a ballet.
And now the one thing that struck me about Garden Blue, as happens sometimes with Alexei Radmansky, when the creative process is going on, I don't have the opportunity to sit in on it very much. I tend to come in towards the end and whatnot. But this work, I mean, I'm a huge fan of your work, obviously. But this one really struck a very highly emotional note that I couldn't hang my hat on any one event. Mm-hmm. And this was just in a studio before it was put together with the designs. I came to for my own explanation, I came to characterize it that I think I'm just reacting to sheer beauty. There's something in it in the relation to the music, the relation to how the dancers gathered and what seemed to motivate them. And it wasn't until later that I went, they're either birds or they're an animal, or they're not actually human, and then when I saw it all together, it had a theatrical reach, again, just straight to the emotions. It sort of went straight to your heart and bypassed your intellect in a funny way. So kudos to you. It's incredibly powerful work. in that same year, you did a work for Alvin Ailey that I went to see. And I thought, if I had been blind taste test, these two works and didn't know who created them, I wouldn't have said this is the same choreographer. Your reference to, you didn't say this, but you sort of referred to it in your journey about what inspires you to create work. Most choreographers need to find their own voice before they really get a freedom to experiment on a wild basis. I'm fascinated with how different each work you do is based on the people who are in the room with you. And that could be said of any choreographer, but most choreographers have some kind of signature that you recognize. Balanchine and Robbins, and you recognize Twyla, you recognize their signature. I don't recognize your signature.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because? Why is that? Or do you agree with that you have one?
I think I agree with that to some extent. I think what's interesting is if you take like 2 Balanchine works, you can see the signature. I think you have to see 10 of my works to see a different signature, that there is a cohesion. So it's, the scenery, the whole, I think what I'm known for is the entirety of the ballet. It's not just, I don't see myself as, I'm just the choreographer. I make the movement. This is the lighting designer. I'll show up, but I don't really care where the lights point or what they are. and these are the costumes, and I'm not a part of it. It's not that way. It's a team effort. And I see myself more as a director who choreographs, because everything falls into and is shared, and the collaborations are so important to me. Anyone I bring on to the team, we kind of have to be involved in each other's work. And I think that's what you can see as the signature.
So now, Herman, you were in on the creation of Garden Blue. Between the two of you, in terms of speaking of collaboration and the person in front of you, what drove the shape of that particular part? There's a pas de deux that comes from that movement. I mean, it's an ensemble piece, but each couple has a feature, a moment. What drove that?
I actually loved how the whole piece was created in a way that it was not only a collaboration with the choreographer, but also a collaboration with everybody in the room. I think also having these beautiful sets made everybody work in sync to try to figure out how to move this whole scenery. And I think it was a different way of work that I had never experienced before. How to connect with every single member in that room, not only figuring out steps, but also how to move each other around. Well, having partner Misty, it's always a pleasure. So it was fascinating to work on that part of it. And it's great that also I miss Jessica by 1 year, but we met 20 years later to do it together. And in fact, I have a photo here because I love this costume. I felt like a hero.
He looks beautiful.
Yeah, there is, when you talk about that collaborative spirit, it is, yeah, it's hard to explain. The colors were really appreciated once I saw it fully realized, but the shapes of those sculptures, that, it was like 6 dancers and 2 objects that danced. Yeah, moved, it was, and seamless. It was really, really remarkable. Is really remarkable. So the third piece on our Now program was to be Alexei Ratmansky's Glazanov's The Seasons, which was a huge company piece. It was for his 10th anniversary, he created it for his 10th anniversary as artist in residence with American Ballet Theater, and wanted to give it as a gift to the company and use as many people as he could possibly do. And he used the school. And I mean, it's like this epic culmination of what Jessica spoke of through time, when you know a group of people, you know their strengths, you know their weaknesses, you know who needs to be prodded, you know who needs maybe to not be prodded, to get the best out of them. But it's a sweeping, beautiful ode to classical dancing. Now, Herman, you've worked with Ratmanski a lot. Now, you've got Jessica, you've got Balanchine, you've got Robbins. The only of these two programs and 6 ballets, you've worked with 5 of the 6 choreographers, 3 of which are living.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, to work with the living choreographer. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. Like, for example, in Fancy Free, I had an amazing time performing this, and I was coached by the greatest. But to be able to work with a real choreographer, living choreographer, that's the best that can happen to a dancer career.
And now, tell me, this will be a hard question to answer. Talk about the dynamic of what it takes to be, I don't know what the right word is, responsive to a choreographer when you don't really know why they want you to do it again.
Yeah, well, Alexa is really, really demanding. In fact, both Twyla and Alexa are both really demanding. They have different approach to that work, though. And I find that Twyla pushes me to the limit, but it allows me to create within my movement. With Alexa, I feel he pushed me to the limit, and he wants me to mold into his movement, and which I think they're both amazing ways, because it gives you different layers to create. And with Alexa, and I was part of the creation of the seasons, he fully pushes you to the limit, and it's really hard to meet his view, because he's really focusing what he wants, and until you don't do it that way, he won't stop, which I find fascinating. I mean, these 10 years I've been creating with him, and he made me a better dancer, as well as Twyla.
Just real quickly on Alexa, do you find, what I find in the creative processes, again, not unlike with Jessica's, I many times walk in towards the end of the process. Every so often, he over the 10 years, he has come in and gone, can you come in and look at this? You know, very rarely does he do that, because he has a real strong focus of what he wants to achieve. I find that his work doesn't really define itself until it's been created, goes to sleep, and comes back again. Did you find that with performing his works, or is that a thing with every choreographer? Is it a question of, as the performer, you need to own it? So sometimes, not unlike a complex book, you need to read it and sleep on it and come back and go, oh, that's what that phrase meant.
I find that I can, with Jessica's piece and Twyla's piece, I can, like you said, I go to sleep, and the next day it feels it's my own. With Alexa, I always have to remind myself each morning what he wants, to be able to meet that criteria. It's almost like you're in a continuous develop and evolving your movement with a choreography.
Now, on the flip side of that, Jessica, when you're working with artists that you, you know, I think you have probably a little bit more collaborative way of creating, but surely you've run into it where you kind of not getting what it is you want to see, or it's not forming properly. How do you deal with that at that moment?
Yeah. I mean, there's different ways. You have your different experiences to fall back on. Time is the thing we're not talking about. Is I always think my work looks better after time has passed. I mean, we're pushing for a deadline. On a world premiere, you don't have much time. You have, I mean, you can get down into like, I have 25 minutes to work with these two dancers and I know what I have to get done. So at a certain point, you push what you want, and then at a certain point, you have to take what you get. And you can only have so much time with the dancer to explain and express, and then you just have to let it go and let them kind of steep on it. And then I always feel like when everyone knows the steps and it gets redone again, and if it's with the same artist, they then have that time to know the steps and then go farther into it with intention and discovery. And so it's always important. It's interesting to see a dance. Some of my dances get repeated for years and other dances go to sleep, as they should. Not everything's a masterpiece, but when you have a piece that gets redone, I finally say, okay, they've risen to what I wanted them to see. On the last performance of 15, we're somewhere. Now I want it to go again. And then everybody finds their footing, their breath, their intention, and that's working together as a team. And then it's consistency within casts, that those people, they rely on each other. That if we're constantly rehearsing for the emergency, but what happens if, the longer two people work together on the same material, what develops and develops? That's really important, and we don't always have time.
And I also find that creating for ABT is a challenge, because the way our rehearsal schedule it's set is we are rehearsing or creating 5 to 6 different ballets a day. So when we're in a room with Jessica rehearsing for an hour, we know already that we have another 5 hours with different choreographers. Mm-hmm. And that's also always a challenge, to go back to this, to what you want, to what the other choreographer wants, and even full-length ballets that we have to put together.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue as a sort of wrap-up, to sort of encapsulate the actual DNA of ABT. 80 years ago, it was started with this boastful thing of the most, I can't remember the quote, the greatest collaboration in history, quote unquote. And its first season, from the get-go, was something like it was a long rehearsal period. It was like a 12-week rehearsal period or something like that. 12 choreographers and 19 works in 12 weeks. And not, it makes you realize, wow, not much has changed. But the thing is, the result, look at these two programs, then and now. There's 6 great works. And aren't I lucky to be able to preside over a time when I can watch a generation not only of dancers but of choreographers come to full fruition and full-throated, confident expression of the power of this art form. So I want to thank you both for taking your time. And we have a virtual Met season that will be going on in reflection of what we would have been doing in each of these 8 weeks, and every single day has a topic on the week that we're performing. So tune in again. We'll talk more about then and now. Okay.
I can't wait.
Thank you.
Yeah, me neither. Thank you so much.
All best.
You too.